All right, so we're going into chapter 4, and this one is life in the colonies. So the point here is that you kind of get an idea of the people that are starting what we consider America, so that when the rebellion starts, when we declare our independence, you can kind of understand why these people are thinking the way they are. That's a little lady in colonial garb, isn't it fun? Okay, these are our key terms. Okay, so we are looking at the British tradition of law and justice because that's what we base the American one on. When we do form our own country, we don't start from scratch. We look at what we came from and then kind of copy it and fix it and do it the way we want it to be. So the document that King John is forced to sign in 1215 is called the Magna Carta. It translates roughly from the Latin as important document or big document. This is the first real restriction that is put on the English monarch's power. So before that, the monarch could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and the only thing that would limit them would be, just someone killing them, really and truly. So in the Magna Carta, it limits our monarch's right to levy taxes without consulting the nobles. The common people at this time don't matter. They are not at all on anyone's radar. We are talking about the king and his rich, friends. The nobles would include sometimes his brothers, his in-laws. The people who are already powerful, they're just making it so that they can have this power more, I don't want to say evenly distributed, but I guess that's kind of the push, is for more of an even distribution. So the Magna Carta also protects the barons' rights to own private property, and it guarantees them a right to a trial by jury. Before this, if they were guilty, you just chop their head off and we're good to go. After Magna Carta is signed, it does have these procedures in place to limit the corruption of the king. Now, it's not a lot of stuff, but when you go from zero limitations to some, you at least get that kind of protection. You at least have something there. And like I said, these rights are limited to our nobility, our barons, our lords, those kind of people. It doesn't, the common people are just still living their lives in the dirt and they don't care. Well, they care, but the nobles don't. Parliament starts because, so first of all, Parliament is kind of like our Congress. There's two houses to it. It started because in the Magna Carta, it called for a great council of advisors to the king, so that, if this person is stupid or if this person goes crazy or if he's just making really bad choices, there are people there to try to stop him. Eventually, we get this two-house legislature. The upper house is the House of Lords. This is made up of nobles, and these are the people who inherit their titles. So if you're thinking about who these people are, it would be the people who in England today are like Lord Canterbury of Shropshire, those people. Those are the people we're talking about when we talk about the House of Lords. The House of Commons is a house made up of people who are elected to that position, but don't get the wrong idea. It's not common people. These people were still usually very rich merchants or landowners or people like that, people that could afford to have a campaign and get people to vote for them. So it says the House of Commons, but it's not common people. Parliament's greatest power is the ability to approve new taxes. No monarch is able to raise taxes without the consent of Parliament. This gives Parliament control over the monarch, because if for some reason the king decides that he needs to go fight a war in France, he can't do that unless Parliament votes him the money to do that. So it's a lot more powerful than people generally, there we go, realize. It sounds kind of boring because it's like, ew, taxes, but it really is important. The English Civil War, I'm going to put on LMS a like really brief explanation of what it is. So I want you to go and look for that to find the story of the English Civil War. It'll kind of make it a little easier, I think. In 1688, King James II is on the throne, and he is an open and proud Catholic in a country that is Protestant. So the people really didn't like him, and he was pushing through some agenda that gave Catholics more rights to worship in peace. But at that time, it meant to the Protestants that the Protestants were not going to be able to worship in peace. So they end up, the Protestant majority ends up they basically write a letter to his daughter Mary and her husband William. William was the Duke of Orange, which is a like county in the Netherlands. And they were like, hey, look, you're Protestant. Why don't you come be king and queen? So they did. It was a bloodless revolution. James was on a boat and out of the country as Mary and her husband William are marching into London. They're crowned. It's called the Glorious Revolution. And under this Glorious Revolution, William and Mary are also required to sign something called the English Bill of Rights. So this expands those rights that were given under Magna Carta to even more freedoms. They include, free elections, freedom of speech in Parliament. The big one, though, that I want you to keep note of is it prohibits it prohibits the king from having a standing army in the country. So you can't have people, or at least a lot of people, whose entire job is soldier. That's not something that the English people are cool with, because if it's peacetime, why do you need a military? That's kind of the thought behind it, is like, why do we need an army if we are at peace? If you have an army, you have the ability to make war on your subjects, and the English think that that's a really bad idea. All of these things that I've just gone through, Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, all of these things are ideas that Englishmen bring with them when they are starting their new colonies. So it's not as if, they left England and then left behind the idea of maintaining their own rights. They bring it with them. So these are still very at the forefront of people's minds when they're starting these new colonies. Oh, I forgot to talk about habeas corpus. In Magna Carta, you have a right to a trial by jury, also in the English Bill of Rights. And habeas corpus is that a person cannot be held in jail without being charged with a specific crime. So you have to be accused of a crime to be held in jail. It can't just be at Her Majesty's pleasure. You have to be accused of something, and you have to go before a court. All right, so in Virginia and Massachusetts, we kind of talked about this in the last chapter. You really need to know that these legislatures are representative governments. We don't start out with a dictatorship or a monarchy. We start with these representative assemblies. So making laws, even from the very beginning, started with people electing who they wanted to make these laws for them. Pennsylvania, it was a little bit more complicated than it was in Virginia and Massachusetts, but not so complicated that it's no longer a elected assembly. Oh, also, okay, so colonial governors, these people are appointed by the king. They represent the king's interests. So your colonial legislators and your colonial governors sometimes butted heads because they had different interests in mind. They wanted different things. In the colonies, there were a lot more people that were allowed to vote than in England. You had to be a landowner, and in England, all the land was already owned by someone. But here in America, anyone could come and own land. I mean, we'll forget about that whole point that the Native Americans were here and they had the land. We'll just pretend that didn't happen for now. And it allowed more people to own land, so then they were able to vote. The people that are not allowed to vote are the usual suspects. It's women, Native Americans, and Africans or people of African descent, whether free or enslaved. So even if you were free and black, still you could not vote. All right, so this case of Zenger. So John Peter Zenger was a newspaper man, and he publishes a series of articles that criticizes the New York governor. Freedom of the press was not always guaranteed. So when Zenger does this, the governor wants to put him in jail for libel. Libel is when you print something that may damage a person's reputation. Now, our modern definition of libel is that if you publish something that is untrue, that damages a person's reputation. At this time, it was only like anything that was untrue. So, I mean, or I'm not sorry, not anything that was untrue, just anything. It could have been true. This is a very large distinction. It doesn't sound like much, but it really is. Zenger's attorney says that in order to have an efficient representative democracy, you have to have people who are educated about the facts. If you keep reporters from reporting on the facts, then you have people who are uneducated and are unable to govern themselves. The jurors actually agreed and found that Zenger was not guilty of libel. The press, after this point, has the right and the responsibility to keep the public informed of the truth. So currently in our country, we have a lot of people who are trying to curtail the freedom of the press, and that's wrong. I mean, even before we were a country, we said no, the press is sacred. If it's true, they report on it and they tell us about it, because we don't want the people in charge to be able to lie to us without any kind of repercussions. So all of this limitation of the press, and even just the flat out lying of the press for a lot of what's going on right now, is inherently wrong and against everything that America is founded upon. All right, so mercantilism is this philosophy that the colonies exist in order to serve the economic needs of the parent country. They are a source of raw materials, and they're a place to sell the home country's goods. The English Parliament passes what's called the Navigation Acts in 1651 to support this idea of mercantilism. The first part of it said that shipments from Europe to English colonies have to go through England first. So basically, if I am French and I want to send something to the colonies to sell, first it has to go through England, and then it has to be shipped out of an English port. This helps to support English shipping, and it also helps to have taxes from basically the second it comes into the country, and then again when it leaves the country, and then when it goes into the ports in the colonies, you can tax each step of that. So the English crown sees this as a way to, kind of fund their government. The second is that any imports to England from the colonies have to come in ships built and owned by British subjects. So this kind of is similar to how usually police vehicles are Chevrolets or GMCs or Fords. Domestic automobile manufacturers. It's so that we can support our own people with something that we know has to be used. There's like 1 million police cars all over the place. So by requiring those local police forces to buy American made, you're helping to keep that money theoretically in the country. And the third part of these navigation acts is that colonies are allowed to sell things like tobacco and sugar, but they're only allowed to sell it to England. On the one hand, that's good because you at least know that you have a market for it. But on the other hand, it's bad because maybe you want to sell somewhere else. Maybe you can get more money somewhere else, and you're not allowed to do that. It also is pretty ridiculous if you have a sugar plantation in British Jamaica that you have to send your sugar to England before you can send it to somewhere like South Carolina. So it has to make this huge trip when it's just so much easier to send it straight from Jamaica up to South Carolina. Because of this and all of the colonists hated it. The colonists were like, this is stupid. Yeah, maybe it helps us a little bit, but I mean, this favors the English. This doesn't favor us. So in the end, they end up just smuggling all of the stuff that they want into the country. Very little goods and services are actually funneled through England, and this ends up affecting us later down the road when we get closer to declaring independence. All right, so that's section 1, and hopefully I will find a time to record section 2 for you as well. Let me know if you have any questions.